with Master Distiller Harlen Wheatley. And Harlen, looks like we've got a heck of a spread here today.
Yeah, we're sitting here in the reconciliation room of the E.H. Taylor house, and it sits on our property. It's the first building that was built on our property. When we were founded in 1773, we were known as the Leestown Settlement, and this is the first house that was built. And everything's centered around this house, and it's been here ever since. And one of the things we did a couple of years, well, it's actually been about 5 years ago, we renovated the house and brought it back to life, and we feel pretty good about it's going to last another 100 years and allow people to enjoy it. And we talk about the history of the house and the distillery, and talk a little bit about Stagg, and that was back during when Stagg was in charge and E.H. Taylor was floating around, and Stagg bailed out E.H. Taylor with the money, and that's kind of how we got started. So it's nice to be part of history, and we're sitting here today in this room going to talk a little bit about some of the fundamental differences in our recipes and our mash bills, and I've said before, there's several things we're known for in the industry. Most of them are all good, and but one of them is the fact that we offer a lot of variety, and what we try to do is match whiskey and bourbons to people's flavors and things that they like. And we can do that through a lot of different ways. You can do it through mash bills, which is what we're going to talk about today, but you can do it through different processing techniques, through fermentation or cooking, or different processing later. You can do it through distillation. You can take the same product and distill it different ways and create different flavors. Lots of different ways to do that. And then you can do it with aging, and aging is such a critical part of the flavor component in a bourbon or a whiskey. And you have to factor that, to me, that's probably the major way that you change your flavor. You could take a 3-year-old bourbon, or you could use an 8-year-old bourbon with the same recipe, and there's basically two different characteristics. Even though they started with the same mash bill and the same distillate, they end up as total different taste profiles and whiskeys. So we're going to talk about the first step, which is the mash bill. And again, we're known for variety, and we have, one of the things I did not too long ago is I used to tell people we have 5 big mash bills, and we're going to talk about 4 of those today. But we've actually expanded, just like with everything else we've done here. We've expanded our operation, we've expanded the number of people, everything we're done. And when you look at the true variety that we offer now through all of our recipes, we're up to 18 different variations. Through mash bill, you might tweak that mash bill through the processing steps, or you might have a total different mash bill. So we have 18 of them now that we're offering and aging, and some of those are on the market, and some of them are to be seen. So it's kind of exciting times for us. But these are still our 4, we call them our legacy brands, and they're really good way to, it's a really good way to understand, especially if you're new to the bourbon market and bourbon, if you're tasting bourbon for the first time, it's a good way to understand what the different varieties are. And the fun part, I always say, is figuring out which ones you like. And it is okay to like more than one. You may like a rye bourbon, or you might like a rye whiskey. So it just depends on the occasion and what you're trying to do for the evening, if it's a cocktail or straight or whatever. So we'll talk a little bit about the 4, but like if you're at home and you had a Buffalo Trace, a Sazerac rye, 6-year-old, and a Weller 90 proof special reserve, those are really 3 good ones to have in front of you, and where you can nose those separately and taste those separately, because they're so different in recipe, and really hone in on what you like the best, And then from there, you can explore different varieties as well. So we'll talk about Buffalo Trace first. And Buffalo Trace really is our flagship brand. It's something that we started, from scratch. We started in 1999 with the first bottle, and we've since expanded, to now it's basically a global brand and growing. And we're producing more every year and continuing to expand that production. But it's a rye bourbon, and we have different varieties, different amounts of rye that we put in our bourbons, and this is our lowest of the rye bourbons when it comes to rye. So it's has plenty of good character, well balanced. Our standard is an 8-year-old bourbon. Again, corn, rye, and barley, those 3 components in there, and 90 proof in the bottle. So it's definitely one we are really proud of it. It's something that we started from scratch, and something that we think is very versatile, and you can use in any kind of cocktail or drink it straight, neat. Depends on how you like it. So like I say, these varieties, if you taste and smell those 3 together, you can really pick up those differences, those nuances that you'll see. And the 8-year-old really, it balances that recipe, that mash bill, with age and the character that you pick up in the wood. And a lot of people ask, and they want to know the exact recipe of our products, and we don't give out the exact recipes, just because we work hard every day to try to figure out how to excite our customers and create these different brands. And it really just we don't want people to go out and try to imitate our brands, but we just don't give those recipe numbers out. But we say it's a rye bourbon, low rye content, 90 proof, and we give people the what they need when they're comparing the different recipes. And then Blanton, the thing that makes Blanton unique is it's the world's first single barrel bourbon. And before Blanton, and it's kind of a long story on how Blanton came about, but really the main idea behind Blanton was hands-on, really focused on the taste of that barrel, one barrel at a time. We had Elmer T. Lee, who worked here from World War II up until about 7 years ago. He passed, but he was very instrumental in bringing Blanton to the public. And one of the things he did is he would go out and he would tell people about single barrel bourbons. And in 1984, which is when this started, there was no such thing as single barrel bourbon. There was no such thing as premium bourbon. Everybody shook their head and said, who in the heck's going to pay $25 for a bottle of bourbon? And he continued to push it and get the word out and promote it, and the rest is kind of history, because every distillery in the really the whole world has a single barrel these days. And that's really what makes it special. It's something we haven't changed the recipe, we haven't changed the techniques since 1984. They're handwritten labels. They got the horse on top that's got a letter on the bottom, very unique package, kind of an iconic package, been in a lot of movies and things. But the difference between Blanton's and Buffalo Trace, as far as recipe goes, is it's still a rye bourbon. However, we add more rye to it. And what that does, when you add rye, it's just like rye bread. It makes it a little fruitier, a little spicier, gives a little bit difference in flavor. And then something else we do to balance that is we distill it at a little bit lower proof. So remember, I talked about how distillation, you can manipulate those flavors, and we do that with Blanton's by distilling it at a little lower proof. The other thing that makes it very unique is the fact that we store it in a metal-clad warehouse. So really we're looking at all facets of variables and trying to give a difference in flavor, in that product. So when the combination is all said and done, we end up with Blanton's single barrel bourbon and a little higher rye content.
It looks like we have a few questions on Facebook, and it's really talking about other brands. We have the 4 brands here. Are there a few other ones that fall into, I know you refer to Mash Bill 1 or Mash Bill 2 that you would want to talk about? Because there's a lot of speculation and a lot of people asking about that.
Yeah, we can take that mash bill and we can create different varieties of bourbons from that single mash bill. And for example, with Buffalo Trace, we take that mash bill. It starts off life with Benchmark. That's our, youngest of those bourbons, and we offer it in a, Benchmark, and then we go to Buffalo Trace, and then we can offer Taylor. We can offer George Stagg Jr. We can offer 10-year-old Eagle Rare, and then we can offer Stagg Senior at 17 or 15 years old or so, and that's the way you do it with that one single recipe. Again, we use aging as the way to change that character of that whiskey, and we can do that with that one recipe. And then same way with Blanton's. We have that one main recipe. That's what I said. These 4 recipes dominate, our time when we're producing. But with Blanton's, we start off life there with Ancient Age, and then we go to Blanton's, and then we got all these other single barrel offerings that we offer through that recipe, like Rock Hill Farms and Hancock Reserve. And we do that, and it offers just a different way of tasting that recipe, and that's part of the fun.
So really, the mash bill is the beginning. It's just it's the foundation.
It's one of the big variables at the beginning, and then you can take that mash bill and manipulate that through the process. So you can distill it differently and age it differently. You could ferment differently. It just depends on what you're trying to produce. But the one thing we're trying to do it from year to year is be very consistent. And we, like with Buffalo Trace, we started that first batch in 1999. We saved a whole lot of the bottles that we wanted to be our standard. And we compare every single batch that we make today to that first standard that we made in 1999. Now, we've freshened up our standards over the years, but every one of those standards are still compared to the first standard. So, the way you think of it is we just try to be consistent, from batch to batch through all those variables. And some of the things are unpredictable, like, I always say Mother Nature, the weather, the wood, the people, all the things that, that are biological that you can't really control. But then you got to manipulate the other things to compensate for that if you have to. So, and that's part of the, whiskey making process. Great. So Blanton's is a little bit more rye. So what we're doing now, we went from low rye to mid rye. Now we're doing a complete different recipe with rye whiskey. It's not a bourbon. It's a rye whiskey, so it follows all the standards that a bourbon does. But the main difference is in the mash bill. So in order to be a rye whiskey, the majority of the grain has to be a rye. If it's a bourbon, the majority of the grain has to be corn. So that really determines the overall characteristics of the start of that product. And then, of course, we like to, if a person decides they like rye whiskey, we like to have the variety to offer on that. So we start off life with this Sazerac rye whiskey, and then we have other ryes that we offer in our portfolio, ending with Sazerac Antique Collection 18-year-old. And it just gives us a good variety of ryes. And I always say, if you write down on a piece of paper everything you like about rye whiskey, then we offer it with Thomas Handy. And Thomas Handy is uncut and unfiltered. So you take the barrel, you take the sample, and you put it in the bottle. And that's what people are learning about the rye whiskey that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the ryes, this one is similar in age, but now a rye whiskey. So you should see that rye increasing as you go. More spice, more, some people say fruitiness, some complexity.
Yeah, and Chris Lanyon here on Facebook says he has all 4 of these, and he uses his Sazerac rye as his go-to for cocktails, and he loves Blanton's as the top of his list for drinking neat.
Yeah, so I agree with that. That's the way to do that. And then with the rye, one thing I found, at least personally, and everybody's different, but with ryes, they don't linger as much as a bourbon because you don't have as much of the corn content in the rye whiskey. So it's a really good whiskey for cocktails because it's has really good character, really good flavor. It doesn't dominate the drink, and it makes good thing, Manhattans or whatever you're mixing up. So that's really the reason we started this age of rye whiskey, because before, when we only had the 18-year-old, bartenders loved it, but they said, we love your 18-year-old, but we don't want to make cocktails with an 18-year-old whiskey. And we say we agree with that. So we started off on the 6-year-old, and now it's pretty popular around the globe, really, but especially here in the U.S.
Yeah, I've got a funny comment. Roger Huffman II says, "I need this guy's job."
Yeah, on the good days, I'm sure.
Yeah,
he wants the job on the good days. There's good and bad, but that's that way with every job. And the fun part about the job is to be able to create these recipes and create these things from scratch, and then see consumers enjoy it, and get the feedback. And right now there's over 500 people here at Buffalo Trace, and every single one of those people are contributors to these products. So when people say that, I think I get to enjoy seeing this all happen. I know who was involved when they made this bottle, when they put it in the bottle, when they produced it, when they cooked it, where the grain came from, the farmers involved, the whole process. And really the enjoyable part is if you travel or go somewhere else and you pull this bottle out of a bar and have a drink, then you can see you can remember where all that came from. So that part's good.
Yeah, I remember you saying to me one time, in all your travels, and you can find a bottle of Buffalo Trace, it was like a little taste of home, no matter where you are.
That's right. All right. So last on the list here is our wheated recipe. So one of the things we do is we take that original mash bill, and then we expand that, and we do it through age. We only have one wheated recipe, but we start off with 7-year-old, and we go all the way up to 23-year-old, and with a Pappy Van Winkle, and some of it's a little older. So it just depends. But with this one, it's the standard is a 7-year-old 90 proof wheated recipe, so it has no rye in it. So you take corn, wheat, and barley, mix those up, cook them, and distill those. And the other thing that makes it a little bit more unique is we distill it a little bit, the lowest of all of our distillates. And what we're looking for is that balance of mild character from the wheat and extra flavor from the distillation. And then we age those up. So you should really see a marked difference between the wheat and the rye whiskey, these two. So that's the wheated bourbon that we have. And like I say, all 4 of these varieties give you a really good idea of how to manipulate and change the flavors. And then really we're just trying to, somebody's a consumer. We have a room full of 100 people. 20 people are going to like the wheat, 20 will like the rye, and the balance might like these 2 rye bourbons. So, and we see that time and time again, and it just depends on the consumer's taste and what they think is good.
Yeah, that's great, Harlan. And we have several questions if you want to answer some of these.
Yeah.
So Matt Zanger on, looks like Facebook, asks, is Elmer T. Lee mash bill number 2? ?
Elmer T. Lee is part of the Blanton's recipe, not Blanton's recipe, but that recipe that we use to make Blanton's. And one of the things with the Elmer is he liked a certain style based on his own personal preferences, and we try to continue that effort. And he liked upper floors in warehouses, a little bit more flavor, a little bit older generally than the Blanton's. So it's the same mash bill, but a little bit different characteristics on the rest of it.
Great. It also said, Cody Allen says, does Buffalo Trace still make Pappy Van Winkle?
Yes, we've been, that's one, we get that question a lot about Pappy Van Winkle, and it's one that, we've been really proud of and, proud to be part of that. It is our weeded recipe. And again, what makes it different is simply the location in warehouses and age. Anytime you take a bourbon and you age it up for 23 years, you're going to get a whole different characteristic because of all the tannins and wood sugars and things you pull out of that barrel. Mm-hmm. So yes, the answer is we've been making that for a while now.
Justin Hayes, I think he's got a great question, and we try to touch on this each episode, but he does ask, how much has production increased over the years? And I think it's really relevant to a lot of the questions we have of, we have a lot of fans, they want more. We're hoping to, open that door wide open soon. So how much has production increased over the years?
So every year we make more and more. We're expanding more than ever. We're spending $120 million over the next couple of years, building a new still, a new dry house, expanding our fermentation. And we've been expanding for the last really 20 years. 20 years, I've been here 26 years. In the last 20 years, we've really invested a lot of money, really what sets us apart, continuing to invest and grow. Every brand across the board has grown, and we're continuing to make more every year. We base it on our demands and, everything that we need now. And so we're growing as fast as we can possibly grow and we're running that capacity and spending the money to expand and put more equipment in place to make more. So, we continue to grow each brand.
Yeah. Hopefully, if you guys haven't seen the past episodes, jump in and look at those, and you can really see that expansion. So, Mike on Facebook says, who is in that picture behind you?
Well, that happens to be Mr. George Stagg. And that's probably, who knows how old he is at that point, but it's a younger picture of him. And again, it was just this whole building basically is dedicated to Stagg and Taylor. We call it the Taylor Building, but just due to the history of everything they've done for us. And if it wasn't for Stagg, the distillery wouldn't be here, because he did so much to invest and build this distillery up to the powerhouse it was back then. And we owe a lot to him and his legacy.
Yep, sure do. We're way over on time. Actually, we're about 23 minutes. We like to only take up about 15 minutes of your time. But any last words you'd like to close this with?
No, I think, like I said, the variety of recipes that we offer is one of the things that we focus on, trying to offer something for everybody. And in some type of variety. And the fun part, try it at home, pick up a bottle of one of these and, compare to the other and enjoy it and just explore and see which ones you like the best.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks, Harlen. I love being in this room myself. It's one of my favorite places at the distillery, and obviously that spread of bourbons and rye whiskey is great as well. So thanks for walking through that with us.
Thank you.